Well, it's officially official. Matty Beniers for 7 more years. But is it a good deal? Let's talk about that on today's episode of Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team every single day. Although we are in the off season now, so we're coming to at least 3 times a week for the next few weeks. If we're meeting for the first time, hello. My name is Erica L. Ayala. I'm your host of Locked On Kraken. Been with you since the beginning. I am a contributor at CBS Sports. Just covered my second ever Olympics, including Beijing 2022, where I covered Matty Beniers making his Olympic debut. And I'm also the founder of Black Rosie Media, where we empower Black women and melanated creators in sports media. And, I have been waiting for the Matty Beniers deal. I know a lot of you have been waiting for the Matty Beniers deal, but now that we have it, of course, we have to analyze it. And that's what we're going to do on today's episode. But I want to let you know before we get too deep into that today's episode brought to you once again by our friends over at FanDuel. And FanDuel has been doing some great stuff this summer. And now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. So visit fanduel.com/LockedOnKraken to get started. So if you missed some of the summer deals, you're not going to want to miss that one. Okay, let's get into the Matty Beniers deal. Came in yesterday. We were not going to record a podcast yesterday either way. So of course, that's when the news came in. But the insiders, I know I sent a message to our Locked On Kraken insiders, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. But talking about the excitement. Also, if you're a Seattle sports fan, you know that Gabby Williams also signed with the Seattle Storm about an hour or two beforehand. So it was a good day in Seattle sports-wise. Or was it? If you want to hear my thoughts on Gabby Williams, make sure you check out Black Rosie Media. We're going to have a live stream at 5 p.m., 6 p.m. 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time, where we're going to talk about the Seattle Storm and, of course, Gabby Williams. But today we're going to talk about Matty Beniers. And let's go over the details. So Matty Beniers signed to a 7-year deal. That 7-year contract, it amounts to effectively 7.1 AAV, 7.14 AAV, and takes us through 2030. And so this is a long-term deal. This is another 7-year contract for the Seattle Kraken. And it makes Matty Beniers one of the highest paid members of the Seattle Kraken roster. Here, before we get into the knit and grit there, here is what Ron Francis said in the press release. Matty has been a core part of our team since making his NHL debut, not only on the ice, but in his commitment to our community and our fans. Signing Matty to a new contract was a top priority for our offseason, and we are excited to have it done. We're looking forward to seeing Matty take the next steps as a player and watching him contribute to many more memorable moments for our franchise. So, everyone excited for Matty Beniers. I'm excited for Matty Beniers to have Matty Beniers with the Seattle Kraken. I will be honest, 7 years at about 7 million AAV is not what I was expecting. And I guess we have to talk about, is this a good value? So I mentioned it's the 7.14 AAV. He's the first draft pick in franchise history to sign an extension with the Seattle Kraken. Now, of course, we've had other players that have come through the expansion draft sign an extension, but Matty Beniers is the first draft pick to sign an extension. And, we talked about last season 37 points, 15 goals, 22 assists in 77 regular season games. That is coming off of an NHL All Rookie honors and Calder Memorial Trophy honors. He led rookies in his full rookie season with in goals, tied, I should say, for 24 goals, points 57, and even strength points at 46. He was selected to the NHL All-Star Weekend, actually right here in Florida. For those who don't know, I'm in Florida. I'll tell you what I'm doing a little bit later in the show, but had to withdraw due to injury. Yeah, he got his bell rung. Don't even get me started on that. 6'2", 178 pounds, 103 points, making him one of two skaters from the 2021 draft class, along with Wyatt Johnston, to reach the 100-point plateau. He's also collected 7 points in 14 playoff games with the Kraken during the 2023 Stanley Cup playoffs, finishing the postseason leading all rookies in scoring. So those are the accolades. But again, downward tick last season. The whole entire Kraken squad was a downward tick. More than a tick, if you really want to get into it. And maybe we will. Maybe we will. But yeah, not a great season for the Kraken, not a great season for Matty Beniers. I understand the hesitancy. I've even talked about it, but I'm leaning on hedging our bets on the future of the Kraken with Matty Beniers as one of the top talents. I also think that, and I've said this before, I also think that the new coaching staff and the focus, the refocus, and the recommitment to establishing, not just for young players, but for all players, a really sound development mentality and philosophy, I think that's going to bode well for the Seattle Kraken. And if I'm being honest, Ron Francis and company need it to bode well because this will not go well for the front office if this contract doesn't work out. There are already some questionable contracts, the 7-year contract to Montour, the 7-year contract to Stevenson, the Philipp Grubauer contract. To add another questionable contract is not going to go over too well. But we're going to talk about that a little bit later on the show. Let's not spoil the grapes. I don't know if that's a saying. Maybe I just made it up. We're not going to focus on the sour grapes, spoiled milk. I don't know. Whatever the case is, we're going to focus on the positive. I do think there's a lot of upside to Matty Beniers. I like that we got this deal done. That being said, it does potentially complicate some things with regard to the Seattle Kraken, even coming into training camp. And so I want to talk about some of the numbers. We're going to head over to our friends at Puckpedia, get a sense of what we know, surmise what we think we know, and make some educated guesses on what this could mean. At minimum, and we've talked about this, if you missed Monday's show, check it out. At minimum, this means an extremely competitive training camp, but perhaps some other things afoot even after we solidify the opening roster. So we're going to talk about that and more on this episode and throughout the rest of the week. So stay tuned right here to Locked On Kraken. But coming up next, I want to talk about, is this a good deal? Let's talk about it. I don't know that I have a definitive opinion, but I want to talk about it. And then later on the show, we're going to introduce a new segment, Locked On Kraken Insiders. You've already been able to play along, but we're going to do stock up, stock down. And this seemed like the perfect time to talk about that. We'll get into it all coming up on Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked on Kraken is brought to you by our friends at Indeed. Now, we are all driven by the search for better. Um, and when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for candidates isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. And, as someone who owns her own business and is in that entrepreneur realm, I know how difficult it can be to find people who are the right fit for your needs, whether it's short term contract work, whether it's long term, whether you're looking for someone to be a co founder alongside you, it can be tough. So, leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning, kind of like AI, from your preferences. So the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at indeed.com/locked on. Just go to indeed.com/locked on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this very podcast. Indeed.com/locked on. Terms and conditions apply. If you need to hire, then you need Indeed. Thanks as always for making Locked on Kraken a part of your daily destination. I am thrilled to have you here. I am thrilled that Matty Beniers is a part of the long-term picture for the Seattle Kraken. Overall, good news, but of course, we have to get into it. And I'm sure we're going to hear other folks get into it over on Locked on NHL. Now that you've made Locked on Kraken your first listen of the day, make your second listen of the day Locked on NHL podcast. Locked on NHL provides you with national perspective on all things NHL each and every day. And on Friday, I'm actually going to be talking about women's hockey and how it relates to specifically the Pittsburgh Penguins, but also I want to talk about the landscape. We've actually talked about the Olympic landscape already here as Oliver Bjorkstrand and Oscar Fiskar Molgaard will have the opportunity to hopefully get Denmark into the Olympics. But we're going to talk about what that looks like on the women's side. Just a few little nuggets of what you can find on Locked on NHL, available on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Again, we bring you your favorite team every single day. Let's get back to the Kraken and Matty Beniers. What does this mean for the Seattle Kraken? Well, in the abstract, I suppose, it means we have secured our lineage, if you will, down the middle. We talked about that, especially in the early days. Everydayers, OGers, we talked about how Ron Francis said that he wants to build up the middle. Goaltending, defense, centerman. That's what he wants to shore up. And from what we've seen, even looking at Berkeley Catton, Shane Wright, who we talked a lot about on Monday, and of course, re-signing or extending a contract with Matty Beniers for 7 years, 7.14 AAV. It looks like Ronnie Francis is staying true to his word. Now, what does this mean in the immediate for the Seattle Kraken when it comes to the salary cap? Now, we know the salary cap went up this coming season. It is expected to go up in the future. But where do we sit right now? Well, if we head over to our friends over at Puckpedia, we are told that the Seattle Kraken right now have a projected cap hit of $87,995,714. That's coming pretty close up on the $88 million cap limit. The floor, of course, they have to spend $65 million. They're at $87,995. So yeah, hitting it pretty hard. The active roster can be 23 players total. Right now, the Seattle Kraken sit at 21 per Puckpedia. And another thing worth noting, that standard contracts, you cannot exceed 50 standard contracts. The Seattle Kraken right now at 51. Now, what does that mean? It does mean that there will be some finagling for the front office, including potentially, perhaps, to some of the players that we mentioned on our last episode on Monday. Now, I broke down what we heard on the Kraken radio network. We'll also hear about them, stock up, stock down, in our next segment, or talk about them, I should say. But there are players like Ryan Winterton, Riker Evans, Shane Wright that we have to account for. And that's 3 players right there. We're talking 2 roster spots, not to mention, current cap space they're saying is, 4.2. But again, we're at that cap hit. Um, eh, there's some money moves that the Seattle Kraken are going to have to do. And that's why I liked um I liked what we heard from excuse me, I got distracted. A Mariners update just came through. I liked what we heard from Everett Fitzhugh, and we talked about this on Monday's episode. But on the Kraken radio network, Everett Fitzhugh was asked by Mike Benton, okay, do you think the Seattle Kraken are done in free agency? And Everett effectively said yes. I broke down, how he answered that. But what he also transitioned to is that if you look at where the Kraken are right now, it's priming us to, and this was pre Matty Beniers contract. He did say, spoiler alert, that the Beniers contract still looming, of course, was the priority. I read you the quote from Ron Francis. Of course, that was the priority. So it seems like now with that put to bed, there might not be other moves. Even though the Seattle Kraken are a part of trade rumors, Brendan Tanev's name has been thrown around for months. Yanni Gourde's name has been thrown around for months. I've even seen Justin Schultz, Oliver Bjorkstrand. That's a heck no from me. Trading Ollie, I would say no to that. But anyway, I digress. There have been all these. Effectively, these are rumors. But I liked what we heard from Everett, in that it's screaming, it's reading, it's giving. The Seattle Kraken might make some early season trades. And he also talked about that he's expecting this to be an extremely competitive training camp, whether it comes to refining the roster, cutting the salary, or making way for moves to be made in the future. It's looking a lot like Everett's going to be right. And I want that so badly for the Seattle Kraken. We are inching closer to a refined roster, and we still need to get better in places. I think training camp, super short window in training camp proper. Of course, if you extend that to the preseason, a little bit more time. I am so curious to see what Disco Dan Bilesma and company are going to do in training camp, because this seems even more competitive than last year. And I said that last year, and what did we get? Joey Decord winning out over Chris Drieger. This is not a Kraken organization that's afraid to make those moves. Historically, in our short history going into season 4, I love that. And we gotta up the pace a little bit. And I think Everett might be right that we have the potential in the pipeline. We definitely have the potential in the pipeline. Now, how those guys show up is going to be really interesting. I talked about it on Monday. Shane Wright has been in this news cycle. He's actively letting people know that he wants his shot. at the NHL. And I don't think he's doing it in a way where he's at least not aggressively forcing the Kraken's hands. To me, this sounds like a guy that knows there is a window that is busted wide open. Not even a window. The door is open for Shane Wright. He paid his dues. He had to learn some hard lessons. We talked about how Ron Francis said, hey, some of his time when he was in the NHL in those first few games right after his draft, those were self-inflicted, insignificant minutes because he was shifting off the ice. I thought that was interesting to say. Talked about the maturity, and I think we've seen him grow in maturity, even in leadership between Hockey Canada and, of course, the Coachella Valley Firebirds. Now, he doesn't necessarily need to be an immediate leader when he comes to the Kraken. He still has some learning to do, getting adjusted to the pace of the NHL. But to know that that's already in the arsenal, that's got to be exciting. And who knows better than Dan Bylsma and Jessica Campbell, who are now on the Kraken coaching staff. Same thing with Ryan Winterton, John Hayden. These guys have to be excited. And what that tells me is that they are going to come into training camp ready to go, or at least they should if they're smart. I think Ty Cartier has a little bit of prove it. He's got to prove it this year. I think he did a lot for the Kraken last year. He did what was asked of him, including switching roles, switching lines. And now he has a chance to settle in with two of the coaches that in no small way are accredited for his success, from going undrafted to being an AHL Rookie of the Year to then making the big leagues the next season. There's going to be a lot of competition. And so I don't really know that it makes sense right now to throw in now some free agents, some some guys that are looking for a home. And Everett hinted at that if you listen to the Seattle Kraken audio network. But again, we're going to talk about them. We're going to talk about Ron Francis, and we're going to talk about Philipp Grubauer in a new segment that we're going to integrate. I'm starting it with our insiders, and then a few days later, I'll bring it to the podcast. But it's going to be stock up, stock down. So I'm going to let you know the prompt that I gave to the insiders, and then I'll give you some of their responses and effectively me responding to their responses. We're going to get into that coming up on today's episode of Locked on Kraken. Today's episode of Locked on Kraken, once again, brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little bit different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers, I repeat, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket for YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV based plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So just visit fanduel.com/locked-on to download America's #1 sportsbook. And remember, even though we're talking about this NFL deal, we know preseason's just about to wrap for the NFL. You can still look at future bets for the NHL. Major League Baseball is in full swing. The WNBA is marching or storming towards the playoffs. And again, if you want to know how I feel about Gabby Williams, join the Black Rosie Media live stream later tonight. But again, visit fanduel.com/locked-on to download America's #1 sportsbook. We hope that you always are betting responsibly. Just live life responsibly. I try. I don't always succeed. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Erica L. Ayala here in Florida. That's right. It's not so sunny, although I am definitely going to the ocean. I am in an Airbnb and I can see the beach from if there was a window at this wall that I'm pointing at. I'm not in the room with the window, but I can see the beach from here, which is very nice. But I'm here because it is the 2024 Amerigo Latam Cup tournament. Once again, I will be one of your broadcasters. You can listen and watch on Flow Hockey all weekend. Tournament actually started today. I'll be picking up games on Thursday, tomorrow. But make sure you tune in. It's going to be on Flow Hockey and it's free. There'll be games starting at 8 a.m., taking you all the way to 9 p.m. And once again, I will be calling the men's Division 2, the women's and men's Division 1 championships. That will be on Sunday. But of course, make sure you stay locked right here on Kraken and follow me personally on social media if you want that schedule. Okay, stock up, stock down. I got this idea from one of our other Locked On hosts, and I really liked it. And I thought it would be something cool we could do with our Locked On Kraken insiders. And so this is something that will be insiders first, but then we'll bring it to the podcast. So now's a great time to tell you. If you want to join Locked On Kraken insiders, text 918-731-3154. 918-731-3154. You get a 14-day free trial, $4.99 after that. And I've got some cool stuff. I'm not quite ready to announce it yet. We have some planning meetings next week, but we're going to be revamping the Locked On Kraken Insiders program. But one thing we're definitely going to do is stock up, stock down. So my question, I gave 3 either people classifications like power play, penalty kill. Obviously, we'll have to get into the season for that. But I gave 3 classifications, people or clusters of people, and then asked our insiders, is it stock up or stock down? The ones that I gave to our insiders, Ron Francis, Philipp Grubauer, and the Kraken Radio Network. I'm going to start with the Kraken Radio Network. I don't necessarily know if I thought much about its stock, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I just think it's always been thumbs up. I'm holding the microphone, but it's 2, there you go, 2 thumbs up for me. Kraken Radio Network, Mike Benton, Everett Fitzhugh, just great work. And I've seen them integrate the athletes a little bit more. It's a stock up for me. Always stock up for me. Philipp Grubauer and Ron Francis. Now, we had some mixed results from our insiders, which I absolutely love. And I think ultimately the insiders and I are more or less on the same page. Now, if I had to answer overall for both Philipp Grubauer and Ron Francis, even I'll say even including for Ron Francis, of course, the Matty Beniers deal. Oh, I'm going to go stock is still up. So if I think of my plateau, like that 50%, they're above the line, or Ron Francis is above the line right now. Well, it's like a leadership term. He's above the line, but he's barely above the line. As a matter of fact, Titanic is on the screen right now and they're bobbing in the water. So I thought that was apropos. Yeah, he's struggling to stay afloat. He's Jack, after Rose takes the driftwood all by herself. No. And here's let me read what some of our insiders said, and then I'll tell you what I said. One of our insiders felt that Ron Francis holding even, rough year, but made the dramatic changes we needed. Now we need to see results. So that's what one of our insiders said specifically regarding Ron Francis. Another insider, Ron Francis actually stock up. I've been it's been a roller coaster. I've been a roller coaster of judgment about Ron, especially given the Stevenson contract is an overpay from day one and goes on forever. But unlike last offseason, he managed to improve the team on paper. And after really diving into it, I think the Berkeley Catton draft selection was very important. The team desperately needs game breakers, and Berkeley is a rare player of that type. I don't want to speak for this insider, but I would love to hear, and I will cycle back to the insiders on our stock up, stock down, specifically on the Matty Beniers contract. And then we can talk about that next week. So you have some time. If you want to become an insider, text, and there's also the link in our show notes, but text the number. So yeah, I think we're all kind of in that same boat. I think he's teetering. It's stock up, but just barely above 50, we'll say. Now with Grubauer, with Philipp Grubauer, I mean, interesting. This one was definitely interesting. So, one of our insiders, with regard to Grubauer, um, stock down. How can it not be? He's a year further away from his excellent playoffs, and Joey is closer than any Kraken goalie has been from usurping him from his starting goalie position. That's pretty, that's pretty spot on. I wouldn't say it's way down, though. That's what one of our insiders had to say. Another insider with regard to the stock for Grubauer. Grubauer is down. Buyout seems likely next summer unless he steals the show back from Joey. So, do we think that Philipp Grubauer can steal some thunder back? I do think he has it in him. And I actually, of course, I mean, this is probably obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. Of course, it would be kind of freaking great for us if Philipp Grubauer takes over the number one spot. Now, can he retain it? Can he maintain it? Can he solidify it? I think is the question. I think it's the question. And with Kraken Audio Network, overwhelmingly, but not unanimously, we have people saying stock up, including me. I told you I'm stock up, but I did want to, I thought this was interesting, and I want to look into this a little bit more. I do have a very specific gripe, although this was a couple of years ago, but I just didn't like the erasure of the Seattle Storm for a very specific reason. I've talked about it on the podcast. Anyway, one of our insiders, Kraken Radio Network, stock down, but for a very specific reason. During the NFL preseason, and presumably during the season as well, King 5 has been running lots of ads about how people can watch the Kraken for free with no blackouts, using ads on incredibly popular football broadcasts to bootstrap hockey viewership. And broadcasting hockey for free may put a bit of a dent in the listenership of the free radio broadcast. Or maybe I'm wrong and a rising tide lifts all boats. Okay, actually, I changed my mind. Stock up. With more overall viewership, people will turn to Kraken Radio more when in the car. So, and I think this is interesting because we have seen, and we're not going to talk about it on this episode, but we have seen that Tegna, who, in full disclosure, Locked On is a part of Tegna. We are Tegna. We've seen that Tegna is really leaning into casting a wide net for hockey. And I've mentioned this before. Jeff Baker, when he was with the Seattle Times, we actually haven't talked about that. So we'll have to talk about that coming up soon. But Jeff Baker in a new role, and is more on the team side than the Seattle Times side. But Jeff Baker has been talking a lot about regional sports networks with regard to, at the time, Root Sports. And of course, now we're with Tegna. And so I think it's really interesting. And I'm hoping that we can get some folks from Tegna to kind of break this down for us and what the vision is. I can tell you from the conference that I was at in LA, where I got to meet some Tegna execs, they are so excited to have the Kraken on their network and to provide regional coverage which of course includes the entire Pacific Northwest, Alaska. We got another update about them expanding again. We're not going to get into that on this episode, but okay, so we all agree Kraken Radio Network stock up. That being said, I appreciate this wrinkle from one of our insiders because for me, you have to think about the mechanism, right? Football, quote unquote, versus hockey. And that was kind of the rub when it came to Root Sports, that hockey wasn't bringing in what Mariners coverage brought in, and how much of the resources do you want to use there? Then how do you kind of make it cost effective? In full disclosure, it's things that we talk about on the Locked On Podcast Network as well, because you obviously are listening to Locked On Kraken, and I would argue that you are more likely to listen to the Locked On NHL show, which make your second listen. But how do we integrate with the overall podcast network? And what are the things that we want to see that we see in football? And how can we make it work in hockey? When, if we're being honest, how the dollars roll in, especially at certain times of the year, they're going towards the football or college sports, college football, college basketball. So it's really fascinating stuff. We're going to have to talk about it, and we'll probably do it in the next week or so, because in a few weeks, it is going to be training camp. I mentioned it, I think, in passing on Monday's episode, but I will be in Seattle once again. I'm doing the 5K. I know I told the insiders I'm doing it. Some of them told me they're going to be running. If you're going to be running, or if you want to run/walk, I will definitely be walking some of it. Use the link in the show notes. That's our show. Be kind to yourselves. Be kind to one another. Hold fast, stay true, loud and proud. We always say, let's go Kraken. And of course, let's go Matty Beniers in that freshly minted 7-year contract. And remember, listen to Locked On NHL, not just for your next listen, but also on Friday, where I will be doing the Women's Hockey Spotlight. And you can watch and listen. Well, you can watch the Amerigo Latam Cup and listen to me call certain games on Flow Hockey for free this weekend. All right. Thanks as always for tuning in, and I will catch you on the next episode. Peace out, Cub Scouts or Girl Scouts or just listeners. Peace out, everybody. I'll catch you on the next episode.